I'm chairing a hearing called "The Role of the United States in the Mexican War Against the Drug Cartels." I think the situation is getting more and more dangerous down there. 2006, Henry Cuellar and I from Laredo, we met with President Calderon. He said, you know, security is my #1 goal for my people, and I am declaring war on the drug cartels. And since that time, over 35,000 people have been killed at the hands of the drug cartels, and it's not getting better. You know, I mentioned going to Pakistan, Afghanistan. You know, last time I was at EPIC in El Paso, I requested to go into Juarez, and they said, Congressman, we can't guarantee your safety in Juarez. We've had 6,000 people killed in Juarez recently. To me, that really speaks volumes. The 2 ICE agents who were killed, or 1 killed and 1 wounded, in my judgment is a game changer, because now, you know, 25 years have passed, now they are targeting our guys down there. You know, they're targeting U.S. law enforcement. I had the opportunity to meet with Agent Avila last week. He was shot 4 times, Zapato was shot 6 times and killed. Agent Avila is walking on crutches, and I said, can you just describe to me the scene? And he said, you know, they boxed us in the classic style, 2 cars were in between, forced us off the road. 10 guys jumped out, AK-47s. All the while, they're yelling in Spanish, you know, we're Americans, we're diplomats. I said, was there any mistaken identity here? He said, absolutely not. They knew who we were. They were in a frenzy. And he said it was evil. Oh, almost 90 rounds were fired from those AK-47s. It is a miracle that Agent Avila is alive today to tell his story about what happened. And when you look at the vehicle, it reminds me a lot of that movie Bonnie and Clyde. When you look at the vehicle with, you know, just about 90 bullet holes in this vehicle. The fact he survived that is a miracle. They transported him to the closest hospital where there wasn't any security. They picked up intercepts, as the cartels like to do. They like to finish what they started. They don't like leaving eyewitnesses. So when they knew that the agent was in the hospital, they're on their way to the hospital to take him out. They evacuated him to Mexico City, and then his whole family went to El Paso. Now he's currently in Virginia. But it raises the issue of, what is our policy in Mexico? You know, what's the plan in Mexico? We passed the Merida Initiative. You know, I was very involved with that with Congressman Cuellar. That's over two years ago. $1.3 billion to provide Mexican or military assistance to the Mexican people. Only 25% of that has gone down to the intended purpose. I questioned Secretary Clinton on Foreign Affairs. Why is it taking over 2 years to just get 25% of those resources down to Mexico? And it's all about the bureaucracy. It's all bottlenecked up in the State Department. When we look at the crisis that's going on in Mexico, we can't afford to wait any longer. And I think we need to act now. And we need to rethink our strategy in terms of what are we doing down there? What are our agents doing down there? Are we going to allow them to be unarmed down there? If we're putting them in a war zone, it seems to me, they should be allowed to carry weapons. But what is the role of the United States, and what is the role of our military with the Mexicans? I think ultimately we're going to be asking questions about, what do we do in Colombia? What were the successes of Colombia? What were the things that didn't work so well? What can we learn from Colombia, what we did there, that operation? And how can we apply those best practices to Mexico? We have a sovereignty issue with Mexico in terms of any military presence on our part, but I think those are the tough questions. We plan to visit with Calderon again in Mexico City, and I think these are discussions that need to be had, because failure is not an option down there, and they are losing down there. And if we fail to act, and we have a failed state just south of our border, that would be a haven for terrorists. And that's just right next door, it's right in our backyard, and we can't afford that to happen. So, you know, lastly, and I know Dr. Chang was here, there's so many threats to talk about, but perhaps one of the biggest emerging threats we have is the cybersecurity issue. I I look at really at three levels. One, the theft of IP in the criminal context in the private sector. Two, espionage. And we know the countries that are responsible for that. Every federal agency has been hacked into, including the Pentagon. And I often make the analogy, as we had the hearings when I was ranking member on the cybersecurity subcommittee, you know, if we captured agents of a foreign power breaking into the Pentagon, stealing paper files, and being caught, it would be all over the Washington Post, the front page of the news. And yet in the virtual world, that is what is happening. Every day, there are intrusions, and they are trying to hack in to steal information. There's a culture over there that, you know, why invent it when you can steal it? Yeah, essentially. NASA's been hacked into. So all of our everything we spent so much money in terms of research and development, they're attempting to steal that. Not to mention the security aspects of the Pentagon and other agencies being hacked into. The piece that keeps me up at night perhaps the most, though, is the cyber warfare piece. And when you talk to the top generals, admirals, General Cartwright's on this, Admiral Mullen understands this, they'll tell you that cyber is not only is it coming, but it's here. We have tremendous offensive capability, and thank God we have that, not too far from here in San Antonio. But our defensive capability is not where it needs to be. Department of Homeland Security has been tasked with the defensive capability. When we had hearings, this was like 4 years ago now, you know, who's in charge of who's in charge of defending the nation? And there's a lot of finger pointing going on. We developed the CSIS commission that Fred served on, did a great, outstanding job making recommendations to the next president of the United States as to how to better protect and harden not only our federal networks, but our private sector networks. The private sector controls close to between 85–90%. Power grids, financial institutions. A denial of service attack or an attack in this country could potentially shut down these critical infrastructures and cause far more economic damage than the airplanes flying into buildings. Once it's kind of like the nuclear missiles, the genie's out of the bottle on this stuff, and when it gets in the wrong hands of a rogue nation, if they take an offensive cyber attack on this nation, they could do great harm. And so that's what we need to defend. And when we ask the question, who's in charge, there wasn't much leadership. And we asked Homeland Security, which is sometimes sort of an orphan child, are you coordinating with the NSA or the DoD that has the expertise? They are now, but 4 years ago they were not. I think the good news on the cyber front is that coordination is now taking place. But it's an evolving threat. Anytime you talk about technology, you got to stay one step ahead of the curve. So let me just say that we're looking at the individual countries going back to the Middle East. Khatib was a scholar in the United States, an Egyptian. He went back and was really kind of the leader of what became more of the militant, violent faction of radical Islam with the Muslim Brotherhood. When we look at Egypt, that is probably the greatest concern we have, that the Middle East abhors a vacuum. And what we have there right now is a power vacuum. And the question is, who's going to fill the vacuum? We know that in Bahrain, there are protests going on in Bahrain by the Shia. And don't think that Iran's not behind that. Iran loves to fill the vacuum. So we got to keep a very close eye, I believe, on what Iran is doing over there, and with the Shia movement, what the Muslim Brotherhood could potentially do. In Egypt, let's not forget that the number 2 man to bin Laden, Zawahiri, is an Egyptian, and he was part of this effort, this movement as well, and had spent some time, in jail. You look at Tunisia, very different story. A very secular, peaceful transition of power. I met with the ambassador from Tunisia. He wants our assistance. I think that is we support emerging democracies. But with these emerging democracies, there are certain threats out there that we need to monitor, I think, very closely. With Egypt, the military is in control. That's, I think, a good thing. They don't like the Muslim Brotherhood. They are going to try to bring in the political process. But we have to keep a very close eye on how that is evolving as well. And with respect to Libya, as I've mentioned, we don't really know what the resistance looks like there. Who are the players that are going to emerge? Or is Gaddafi going to be able to stay in power? We had the DNI Clapper saying that Gaddafi is going to stick around. So as long as Gaddafi is there, we're going to have a no-fly zone. That's the whole purpose for having it. I'd rather eliminate the threat, not have to have that no-fly zone. Not to rail on the DNI, but Mr. Clapper said the Muslim Brotherhood was a secular movement. That's so far from the truth. It's a radical religious movement in the Middle East that we need to pay attention to as well. So all these issues are complex, challenging. I do think Iran, we really have to keep our eye on Iran. I asked Secretary Clinton if we're being so supportive of the movement in Egypt, as we should, and in Libya and Tunisia, where are we on Iran? Why is the administration silent? Why aren't they saying something about the resistance in Iran? Because I think if we have an opportunity to support a resistance in Iran, which I think is still one of the greatest threats out there, we have to be careful. It can't be done in a way where it looks like they're a stooge of the United States of America, which is a problem with the Middle East in general. So just in closing, I think we have to be, the threats are there, they're very challenging, and I think we need to be very careful. I know the Admiral agrees with me on this. Anytime we make the decision to commit our military forces, we have to be so careful because of the unintended consequences, particularly in a region that is so complex, culturally, historically, that doesn't backfire on us. In Afghanistan, I think we're winning militarily, but we have great concern about what happens after the surge operation. It's eventually, I mean, the power there is at the tribal level. It's not centralized. They don't like Kabul. They see Karzai as a corrupt leader, and it's all at the tribal area. And if we can't bring the tribes together and unify the tribes towards a more stable and peaceful Afghanistan, we will not win this conflict. And if we can't work with the moderate Muslim in the Middle East to defeat the radical Muslim, then we will not win this struggle. So with that really positive, uplifting message, I just sort of tell like it is, because I live this every day, and I wanted to come here today just to tell you about the way I see it from the briefings I received. But with that, just let me say thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to having a dialogue with you. Thank you.